Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight. The House Ethics Committee releases a report on former Congressman Matt Gaetz. The report accuses Gaetz of statutory rape and illicit drug use. What does Gaetz say in response? Arlene Richards reports. And President Biden commuting most federal death row sentences to life in prison. This just weeks before President-elect Trump is set to take office. Jason Blair brings us the details. The United Healthcare CEO murder suspect pleads not guilty in court, while his attorney criticizes the government. David Lam has the latest in the high-profile case. The man arrested for allegedly setting on fire and killing a woman on the New York City subway has been charged with first-degree murder. Authorities identified a suspect as an illegal immigrant from Guatemala. Israeli forces have been patrolling southern Lebanon as the ceasefire with Hezbollah continues. Meanwhile, Israel's prime minister says progress has been made to free the hostages held in the Gaza Strip. And Jason Perry reports.
This is NTD Evening News. Live from our global headquarters in New York City, here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Iris Tao in for Tiffany Meyer. The House Ethics Committee today released its long-awaited report on former Congressman Matt Gaetz. The report was published moments after Gaetz asked a federal court to block it. NTD's Arlene Richards has more.
In a 42-page report released on Monday, the House Ethics Committee accuses former Congressman Matt Gaetz of paying tens of thousands for sex and drugs, including paying a 17-year-old for sex in 2017. The Republican-led committee released the report just moments after Gaetz filed a complaint to block it. Gaetz claimed the committee is violating its own rules by exercising authority over a private citizen. In the complaint, his lawyers say the report is an unprecedented overreach and threatens fundamental constitutional rights. They say the committee improperly continued their investigation after Gaetz resigned and without giving the former congressman proper notice. Earlier this month, the committee secretly voted to release its report after initially voting against doing so. Democratic Representative Sean Casten said he was happy the report was released.
I'm happy only in the sense that the House has to hold itself to a higher ethical standard if we're to be, have the trust of the American people.
Last week, Republican Representative Larry Bookchan said he voted against the release.
Well, I voted against it because there's only been a couple of other cases in recent history where a former member had an ethics committee report released after they were no longer a member of Congress. So it was procedurally a problem for me.
According to the report, there's evidence that Gaetz regularly and illegally paid women for sex during his time in office, and that he used illegal drugs such as cocaine and ecstasy, received improper gifts, and sought to obstruct the committee's investigation. The report concludes that the Florida Republican violated House rules and state and federal laws. Gaetz responded to the report with posts on X, containing testimonies from women who said they didn't charge him for sex. In a post last week, Gaetz denied any criminal wrongdoing, writing, "It's embarrassing, though not criminal, that I probably partied, womanized, drank, and smoked more than I should have earlier in life. I live a different life now." The Justice Department concluded a years-long probe of Gaetz in 2023 and officially decided not to charge him. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
President Biden announced this morning that he's commuting the sentences of 37 of the 40 federal death row inmates to life in prison. NTD correspondent Jason Blair brings us the details and reactions from some lawmakers.
37 of the 40 federal prisoners sentenced to the death penalty will now serve life in prison without parole. President Joe Biden announces the move on Monday morning, saying it's consistent with his administration's moratorium on federal executions. He stated, "Make no mistake, I condemn these murderers, grieve for the victims of their despicable acts, and ache for all the families who have suffered unimaginable and irreparable loss." The 3 prisoners who weren't included were involved in high-profile crimes, involving terrorism or hate-motivated mass murder. Robert Bowers, who killed 11 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in a synagogue mass shooting in 2018. Dylan Roof, who killed 9 in a mass shooting at a church in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015. And Zohar Sharnaya, who killed 3 in the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013. Some reacted strongly to Biden's action. Congressman Keith Self called the move a horrific betrayal of justice. He posted photos on X of 2 child murder victims of one of the prisoners whose sentence was commuted. And Congressman Dan Muser reacted on X saying, President Biden's decision to commute the sentences of 37 federal death row inmates is not just senseless, it's an outrageous example of this administration's upside-down and backwards ideology. There are also advocates for Biden's move. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley has been vocal in calling for the 40 federal death row prisoners' sentences to be commuted. Earlier in December on Human Rights Day, she urged the president to make this happen before he leaves office.
State-sanctioned murder is not justice. And the death penalty is a cruel, racist, and fundamentally flawed punishment that has no place in our society.
And reportedly, Pope Francis spoke with Biden over the phone last week and urged him to take the action. The Pope also posted on X on December 8th, praying for those on death row in the U.S. to have their sentences commuted. Pope Francis has a history of being outspoken against capital punishment. Earlier this month, Biden commuted sentences for about 1,500 and pardoned 39 individuals convicted of nonviolent crimes. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said at the time that Biden has more to come, so it's possible we'll see more acts of clemency from the president before his last day in office on January 19th. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
And President-elect Trump's transition team issued a statement today criticizing Biden's actions. In a statement, Trump's communications director Stephen Chung called Biden's decision a slap in the face to the victims, their families, and their loved ones. The statement added that Trump stands for the rule of law. United Healthcare CEO murder suspect Luigi Mangione pleads not guilty in court today. His attorney also criticizes the government, claiming Mangione's right to a fair trial are being violated. NTD's David Lamb has the latest in the high-profile case.
Have you pleaded to this indictment, sir? Guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty. Luigi Mangione, the man accused of fatally shooting health insurance executive Brian Thompson on a Manhattan street, pleaded not guilty on Monday to New York State murder charges that brand him a terrorist. His attorney expressed displeasure with Mangione's treatment, saying his rights are being violated.
The second thing I want to make a record of, Your Honor, is I'm very concerned about my client's right to a fair trial in this case. He's being prejudiced by some statements that are being made by government officials.
Mangione faces several charges, including murder through use of a firearm and stalking. Victim Brian Thompson was the CEO of United Healthcare. He was shot and killed in early December outside an investor conference. Mangione was arrested at a McDonald's restaurant in Pennsylvania 5 days later. He waived extradition in Pennsylvania and was transferred to New York last week.
These federal and state prosecutors are coordinating with one another, but at the expense of him. They have conflicting theories in their indictments, and they are literally treating him like he is like some sort of political fodder, like some sort of spectacle. He was on display for everyone to see in the biggest staged perp walk I've ever seen in my career. It was absolutely unnecessary. He's been cooperative with law enforcement.
If convicted, Mangione faces a maximum sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. David Lamb, NTD News.
The man accused of setting a woman on fire on a New York City subway train yesterday has been charged with first-degree murder. That's according to the police. Sebastian Zepeda is accused of lighting a sleeping woman's clothes and blanket on fire. Authorities are calling it a brutal murder, an example of depraved behavior. The first-degree murder charge stems from a death occurring during the commission of a felony, in that case, arson. Zepeda is a 33-year-old Guatemalan citizen who U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement says entered the U.S. unlawfully. Israeli forces continue to patrol through southern Lebanon during the ceasefire with Hezbollah. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister said progress has been made in negotiations to release the hostages still held in the Gaza Strip. NTD's Jason Perry has the details.
In a video released on Monday, Israeli troops were seen patrolling through southern Lebanon as the ceasefire with Hezbollah continues. Israeli forces recently reported finding more terrorist sites in southern Lebanon, including a weapons storage facility containing more than 100 explosives. Israeli troops put some of the weapons reportedly confiscated in southern Lebanon on display at a site in northern Israel. An Israeli officer explained how Hezbollah got the weapons.
A lot of the weapons is Iranian weapon that came through Syria. That is the vast majority of it, but there's different kinds of it. Some is Russian, some is Chinese. Some of it is locally made by Hezbollah.
And in the Gaza Strip, the fighting continues as Israeli forces continue to battle the Iran-backed Hamas terrorist group. On Monday, Israel reported killing the head of Hamas's security directorate. Israel has said they will continue to keep the pressure on Hamas to release the approximately 100 hostages who remain. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave an update on the hostage negotiations.
There is progress. I don't know how long it will take. We will continue to operate in any way and without a pause until we bring them all back home from the enemy's land.
Meanwhile, across Israel's eastern border, Syria's new rebel leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, continues to meet with world leaders as the country's new government takes shape. And after meeting with Qatar's foreign minister on Monday, he said that Qatar's participation in Syria's development will be, quote, effective and purposeful. This comes as residents in Syria have made their voices heard, saying they want to have a free Syria that will include freedom of religion and equal rights for women.
We are demanding women's rights from the new state, the new Syrian state, and women must not be excluded from rights in this system.
At the same time, Christians in Syria have also voiced their concerns with Syria's new leaders.
Are they serious about creating a civil Syrian society where all its citizens have the opportunity to live freely, and especially its Christian citizens? So we are waiting.
Church leaders in Syria have advised Christians to scale back their Christmas celebrations this year as the new government takes shape. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Germany is searching for possible security lapses after a man drove his car into a Christmas market. He killed at least 5 people. The suspect is a 50-year-old psychiatrist from Saudi Arabia. A motive remains unknown. He left video messages on his X account on the day of the attack. In the videos, he blamed Germany for the death of Socrates and accused police of stealing a USB stick from him and destroying a criminal complaint he had filed. A newspaper said he had undergone psychological treatment. The tragedy cast a spotlight on security and immigration ahead of an election. The president of Germany's federal police says Saudi Arabia warned Germany about the suspect as far back as 2023. A local hospital said it was still treating 72 injured people. 15 are in severe condition. And coming up, surprise payments from the IRS are on their way to millions of Americans. Could you be eligible for up to $1,400? Christina Corona reports. And Nissan, Honda, and Mitsubishi in merger talks. But Nissan's former CEO says the struggling companies would form a bigger struggling company. That and more when we return. The Internal Revenue Service is issuing payments of up to $1,400 to approximately 1 million taxpayers who qualified for COVID-19 stimulus checks in 2021. NTD's Christina Corona has details and tells us who qualifies.
Approximately 1 million taxpayers will soon receive special payments of up to $1,400 from the IRS, either through direct deposit or by mail as a paper check. The IRS is distributing about $2.4 billion to taxpayers who failed to claim the recovery rebate credit on their 2021 tax returns. This credit was available to those who missed or received less than the full amount of the COVID stimulus payments. IRS Commissioner Danny Werfel stated that internal data revealed 1 million eligible taxpayers had overlooked claiming this complex credit. Taxpayers eligible for the special payments had filed a 2021 return but either left the recovery rebate credit blank or entered $0 when they were eligible for the credit. Payments will be automatically sent to eligible taxpayers this month and are expected to arrive by late January 2025. The maximum payment amount is $1,400 per individual, and the IRS will notify eligible taxpayers by mail. Taxpayers who weren't required to file a tax return for 2021 can still claim the credit. They'll need to file a 2021 return by April 15, 2025, even if their income was minimal or non-existent. Christina Corona, NTD News.
As millions of Americans hit the road for Christmas, they can expect a special gift at the gas station. Drivers will likely be greeted at the pump with the cheapest Christmas Day gas prices since 2020. GasBuddy, an app that crowdsources pump prices, expects a national average of $3.01 a gallon on Wednesday. That's a modest dip from the $3.10 last year. Still, it's more than the cost of fuel before COVID. The national average on Christmas Day in 2019 was $2.54. U.S. inflation saw another uptick last month as the Commerce Department recorded its highest rate since July. Are Americans feeling the pinch of price increases, and are they hopeful for relief during a second Trump administration? NTD's Sam Wang was out on the National Mall in D.C. to hear from them.
Are you feeling the pinch of inflation right now?
Oh yes, very much so. I would say everything from rent to groceries since the last year has gone up.
I don't think it's a question, it's just a fact that it's way more expensive now than it was like 5-10 years ago.
It's hard to live even off of like an $80K salary nowadays. Even then, like, you need a 2-income household.
And where are you from?
New Jersey.
Oh yeah, that's one of the more expensive states.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd say we're middle class, but at this point we feel
on the lower end of that.
On the lower end of that.
So we're seeing inflation. We feel it. We fortunately are not heavily impacted by it because we're comfortable.
Compared to a lot of other economies, the U.S. economy is doing great. So I can't complain.
I guess the whole thing is that milk and gas, right? Like if milk is one price, gas should never be more than milk, but milk seems to be, it's flipping.
I don't know how people are affording housing. Thank God we bought a few years ago. We really have had to kind of watch what we're purchasing, make certain things a priority.
What kind of changes do you anticipate when Trump becomes president in this next year?
Well, as a small business owner, Mac Daddy Spuds, I hope that it goes back to like when he was first in office, like the economy seemed to be stronger.
I can expect a lot of international trade to come through.
It's going to look pretty much parallel to the previous administration of Trump.
Just a positive economy to watch inflation hopefully go down, interest rates start to drop.
There's 3 levels of the government, right? We all function together, so we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I read everything about the tariffs. It will get worse, a lot worse. That's what I'm thinking.
I think just like his foreign policies and his economic policies will probably do something that's going to be helping out the country.
You know, in the surrounding area, we have, over 500,000 to millions of government employees, and if they lose their jobs by the government being gutted and budget cuts, then we're going to see a whole lot of people out of work.
A lot of our friends and family, even those that voted for the other guy, have a hope that we haven't had in a very long time.
Honda and Nissan in talks to potentially merge. What's behind the momentous discussions? We investigate.
Honda, Nissan, even Mitsubishi are considering merging.
The future of mobility will not be differentiated by conventional hardware, but by intelligence and electrification.
Honda's CEO saying tectonic shifts are taking place in the industry and bold moves are needed, in particular for Honda.
Where they lack is trucks. They sell the Ridgeline, but they don't sell real off-road vehicles. And that's where Nissan can come into play. They make the Armada. They sell the Frontier.
Auto expert Lauren Fix says she expects more body-on-frame type trucks added to Honda's lineup. If they merge, they'll create the world's third largest car maker by number of cars made, behind Toyota and Volkswagen. This would help Nissan especially as it's slashing thousands of jobs amid failing profits.
My guess is that the Japanese government got involved and said, listen, you can't let one of our largest car companies die because they can't make things work, so you need to work together.
Fix says without a merger, Nissan and Mitsubishi could cease to exist.
A potential alliance or partnership between the two companies are going to be another company fighting for survival.
Former Nissan CEO Carlos Ghosn says he believes the merger will not be successful. He says the companies don't complement each other enough. There's too much duplication. He says Nissan has made numerous mistakes and that he has no confidence in its current leadership.
For which they are surrendering in a certain way in a panic mode by saying, please help us. They turn into an arch rival of Nissan, which has been Honda. And what's interesting is Honda, as you know, has no experience in alliances.
He says a merged company would struggle against Toyota, Tesla, and even Chinese automakers.
Coming up, a former Marine accused of training Chinese military pilots will be extradited from Australia to face charges here in the U.S. A retired colonel joins us to explore the bigger picture behind the case. And President-elect Donald Trump threatening to take back the Panama Canal. More from Trump's first rally speech since winning the election after the break. Welcome back. If you're just joining us now, here are some of today's top headlines. The House Ethics Committee released a report on its investigation into former Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz. It concluded that Gaetz paid for sex and illicit drugs during his time in office and violated state and federal laws on prostitution and statutory rape. Gaetz refuted the findings and denied any criminal wrongdoing. President Biden commuted the sentences of 37 federal prisoners on death row to life imprisonment. It means just 3 federal inmates continue to face execution. Luigi Mangione, the suspect in the killing of the United Healthcare CEO, pleaded not guilty to 11 counts in a New York court. He also faces federal charges and state charges in Pennsylvania. Police identify the suspect who's accused of setting a woman on fire and killing her on a New York City subway. Sebastian Cepeda, an illegal immigrant from Guatemala, has been charged with first-degree murder. And President-elect Trump spoke at a Turning Point USA event yesterday. In his first rally speech since winning the election, Trump threatened to take back the Panama Canal, saying the U.S. is being, quote, ripped off by Panama, and warning about China's growing influence on the canal. Here's the story.
We will demand that the Panama Canal be returned to the United States of America.
President-elect Donald Trump threatening to take back the Panama Canal, a man-made waterway in South America that the U.S. depends on for transporting goods and military. The U.S. built it in the early 1900s and maintained control of it. But President Jimmy Carter transferred control of it to Panama in 1977 to improve relations with Latin America. Now Trump says Panama is ripping off the United States.
Our Navy and commerce have been treated in a very unfair and injudicious way. The fees being charged by Panama are ridiculous, highly unfair, especially knowing the extraordinary generosity that has been bestowed.
Trump also brought up China.
It was solely for Panama to manage and not for China or any other country to manage. You see what's going on there? China.
China is the canal's second largest user behind the U.S., and it's been expanding its influence there by investing in Panama's mining rights, developing infrastructure, and creating Spanish-language CCP media. A Hong Kong-based firm gained control of 2 out of 5 ports surrounding the canal. In 2017, Panama switched its diplomatic relations from Taiwan to the Chinese Communist Party. A year later, it joined China's Belt and Road Initiative, a CCP plan for growing its influence largely by investing in other countries' infrastructure. U.S. military leaders are concerned about Chinese projects along the canal. That's because Chinese firms are subject to CCP control.
And Panama's president yesterday rejected Trump's suggestion that his new administration could try to regain control of the Panama Canal. A short time after Trump's speech, the president of Panama released a video declaring that every square meter of the canal belongs to Panama and will continue to belong to his country. He added that Panama respects other nations and demands respect. And while on the campaign trail, Trump promised to expose corruption in what he calls the deep state. He said he plans to create a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Our legal correspondent Arlene Richards explores how the commission may work.
President-elect Trump has promised to expose abuses of power in our government.
To expose the hoaxes and abuses of power that have been tearing our country apart, we will establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to declassify and publish all documents on deep state spying, censorship, and corruption. And there are plenty of them.
He promises to declassify the remaining files surrounding the assassination of John F. Kennedy. This isn't the first time Trump has promised to release confidential documents. In 2018, then-President Trump ordered the release of some documents from the DOJ's Russia investigation, including 20 pages of a surveillance application that targeted his former campaign advisor, Carter Page. At that time, he told The Hill he hoped declassifying all of the documents would become one of his crowning achievements. Then, in 2020, near the end of his term, Trump posted on social media that he authorized the total declassification of any and all documents pertaining to the single greatest political crime in American history, the Russia hoax. Likewise, the Hillary Clinton email scandal, no redactions. 2 weeks later, his then Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, said in a court filing that Trump didn't mean it, and that he was only giving his Attorney General permission to declassify documents for his own intelligence investigation. The Constitution gives the president broad powers to classify and declassify documents. This is commonly done through executive orders. As president, Trump will have the power to declassify large batches of documents. How will he do it? In 2022, Trump said he declassified documents that he stored in his Mar-a-Lago residence. He told Fox News this.
It doesn't have to be a process, as I understand it. You know, there's different people say different things, but as I understand, there doesn't have to be. If you're the president of the United States, you can declassify just by saying it's declassified, even by thinking about it.
Many legal experts have said there's a process before declassification is final. The American Bar Association said in an article that legal precedent confirms there has to be a formal procedure, even if the president signs an executive order. Now, Trump has proposed a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to carry out the declassifications. Presumably, the commission will find the targeted documents and then follow all of the necessary procedures. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
A former U.S. Marine is accused of training Chinese military pilots in violation of an arms embargo. Daniel Duggan, who used to be an American citizen but is now Australian, will be extradited from Australia to face charges in the U.S. Joining us now to explore this latest development is retired Colonel Grant Newsham, Senior Fellow at the Center for Security Policy and author of When China Attacks. Grant, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, what do you think this case tells us about the potential risk of China targeting U.S. military personnel? How concerned should America and its military allies be about this?
Well, they ought to be very worried about it. The Chinese have been going all out for decades to try and get military know-how, technology, and just the way that we operate. Everything is of interest to them as they go about building up a military that can take us on and defeat us. What happened here should be kept in context of when it happened. And when this Marine captain, ex-Marine captain, was doing these things, keep in mind that much of the U.S. military's leadership saw nothing wrong with engagement with the PRC. And a lot of America's business and financial class didn't see anything wrong with it either. And also Capitol Hill, by and large, thought letting China into the World Trade Organization, for example, was a very good idea. And when I mention what the military was doing, our leadership, Note that the CNO, the Chief of Naval Operations, on 2 occasions around 2006 and then again in 2013, took very senior Chinese naval officers for tours of U.S. aircraft carriers, U.S. nuclear attack submarines. In 2009, the commander of U.S. Indo-PACOM was asked when he was in China on a visit if he thought there was anything wrong with China having aircraft carriers. He said no, and he'd be glad to help them as much as he could. So that gives you a sense of how things were, what the zeitgeist was, what the thinking was when it came to engaging with China. So when this fellow is now being prosecuted and extradited, it's a long list of people who've got something that they should apologize for, should not have done. But this has been target number one for the Chinese, is get as much military know-how as possible so they can defeat us.
And talking about internal mechanisms here, you also served in the Marine Corps. What kind of protocol or measures were in place to prevent active or retired military officers from sharing, either intentionally or unintentionally, military intelligence and expertise, like you said, with foreign actors such as the CCP? How strict or enforceable are these measures?
Well, the measures exist. They were not enforced all that well. You had a conga line of senior U.S. military officers, serving officers, trying to get their visit to China. You had retired officers going to China on visits as well. Yes, there were approvals that were required, but I'm not sure how much these were honored in the breach. But if you look at just the engagement that was done with the PRC, with the Chinese military, in order to just somehow create goodwill, as I said, we gave them a lot of things we should not have. And these tours of attack submarines and aircraft carriers, where the Chinese would be asking questions rapid fire, getting answers about all of them. This should not have been done, but the rules are in place. But even better, by then, the time period we're talking about, it was obvious to anybody that China was a threat, that it was coming after us. Any U.S. officer should have had the decency, just the common wisdom, to know that this is not something you should be doing, is giving these people secrets. But it was pretty much U.S. military and U.S. government policy and U.S. financial class and business class to deal with China, give them what they want. They weren't a threat, and we're paying for this now. So what you have here is one officer, one ex-Marine, who shouldn't have done what he did. What he did was at best stupid and at worst traitorous. But as I said, it's a long list of names of people who've done similar things.
Well, we were talking about China's efforts to potentially infiltrate into the U.S. And while we don't know if the allegations in this one case are true, but speaking more broadly, how could the CCP benefit from receiving such training from experienced former U.S. military personnel? Could it make the U.S. potentially more vulnerable in a potential conflict with China?
Definitely, it's going to cost American lives. The information, the know-how that they got from this person, in addition to what they've gotten from almost countless others, is going to, as I say, it is going to lead to a very big butcher's bill, which means Americans get killed doing this. Think about what it takes to operate aircraft carriers, for example. The Americans are top dogs, and many of our officers thought, well, the Chinese will never figure it out because it took us 70, 80 years really to master this capability. It'll take the Chinese at least as long, so we have nothing to worry about. And there was also a sense, well, the Chinese just aren't our equals. They'll never figure it out, so let them see it. It doesn't matter. They're not smart enough. Well, they're as smart as we are. And this was suicidal, what we were doing. And the Chinese in every area, if you look at how their military has built up, it looks like how we do things. Their hardware looks an awful lot like ours. And the purpose is so they will have a military like ours that can take us on. And you look at, once again, go back to aircraft carriers. This Marine, ex-Marine, was showing them how to land on aircraft carriers. That appears to be some of the know-how he gave. But you look at how a carrier operates, and there's this ballet which takes place on the deck, where the ground crew are doing everything necessary to get planes in order, launch them, recover them. And that is literally a ballet. And the Chinese have mastered it. And they didn't get it from this guy. They got it from other people. And there's others who helped the Chinese get this know-how. We're just talking about aircraft carriers here. I remember when the Chinese visiting groups of Chinese officers used to come to Hawaii, and all the services would give them a wonderful show and tell. There was one that didn't, and that was the United States Marine Corps. And we got criticized for not being friendly enough with the Chinese, but we saw no real reason why we would want to help people who are trying to kill us get better at what they do. But this was how it was, and you couldn't even say the Chinese were an adversary. But they get this capability, and as I say, they are smart enough to put together something that could give us all sorts of trouble and already can. And this is really a self-inflicted wound that we have done to ourselves.
And that leads us to the most important question here. We know that both the UK and Australia, our allies in AUKUS, have both tightened their laws surrounding former military staff. What do you think the U.S. should do in this case to prevent the CCP from targeting former U.S. personnel and more people here?
Well, one thing, you do have to make it so it gets caught and punished right away. And you're also going to have to punish some very senior officers. Going after an ex-Marine who was a captain, which is a fairly low rank, that is not sending a message to anyone. You go after the top dogs who've gone on these junkets to the PRC, who go to the Sanya dialogues. This basically subversion, several days of subversion and fun in the sun that takes place in China and seems to have no trouble attracting former retired U.S. officers senior officers to attend it. But also there's going to have to be somebody telling these people, what on earth is wrong with you that you are helping our enemy to get better so that they can kill us? I don't know how you actually get people if people can't figure that out on their own, I'm not sure that a reminder is going to do much for them. But this has been ongoing for at least 20 years, and it needs to be addressed now. But this one case, nobody should, of the fellow who's going to be extradited, nobody should take any satisfaction from it. And you mentioned, I think, the Australians and one other, but the Canadians, just recently, there's been a very good report done on a number of Canadian pilots who have gone to China and actually helped the Chinese build up their sort of fighter aircraft capabilities. There's names, there's photographs of all of this. Goodness gracious, one hardly thinks that we're trying to corner the market on traitors. That's how bad this is, and there really is no way to understate what has happened here, or to put it nicely.
Well, hopefully this one case will at least help shine light on and bring awareness to the dangers are being posed by the CCP to different countries, including the U.S. Thank you so much for joining us, Retired Colonel Grant Newsham.
Sure, pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And coming up, baseball star Shohei Ohtani was named AP's Male Athlete of the Year today for the third time in his career, putting him in select company. Dave Martin joins us to discuss. And honey-infused spirits and gins that change color are set to wow guests at British Christmas parties this festive season. Malcolm Husson takes us to the Spirit of Christmas Fair in London after the break. And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. So Dave, a lot going on today, but first let's start in baseball as Shohei Ohtani was named AP's Male Athlete of the Year for the third time in his career. What do you make of that?
I thought they got it right. Swimmer Leon Marchand of France, who won 4 Olympic golds this summer, he was second. Golfer Scottie Scheffler finished third after he won the Masters. He also got a gold this summer. I'm a little surprised Aaron Judge wasn't any higher, though. At least batting-wise, he might have actually edged out Ohtani, but Ohtani got him on the base pass, stole 59 bases. That was in addition to his 54 home runs. First player ever in the 50-50 club. Plus, his Dodgers won the World Series. He had quite a year. I mean, imagine how good he can be next year when he should be able to pitch again. Anyway, for Ohtani, this award he enters some select company winning it for the third time. Tied with Michael Jordan, only behind LeBron James, Lance Armstrong, and Tiger Woods. There's only 3 of one more, so very impressive.
And now shifting gears to college football playoffs. We know that at least all 4 home teams won over the weekend. What do you make of that, and what were some of your biggest takeaways?
I love that they'd seen these games on the campus sites. It added a lot more excitement than having them in those big neutral dome stadiums that they normally have. Of course, all 4 games were pretty much blowouts, That was surprising. I thought Indiana would actually beat Notre Dame. Instead, the Irish pretty much dominated them from the start. The Hoosiers did get a couple touchdowns late. Then on Saturday, dominating win by Penn State over SMU. Texas beat Clemson. Really wasn't a blowout, but they didn't have to sweat it out either. It wasn't exactly back and forth. Finally, I think the game we all thought would be the closest, Ohio State, Tennessee, that was a blowout. I mean, Ohio State came out so strong in that first quarter, 21-0 lead. They looked like they were pretty much angry at the way the season ended without that loss to Michigan. It definitely showed. So now we've got the second round starting next week. We've got a New Year's Eve, Boise State versus Penn State. Then we've got a triple header on New Year's Day, Texas, Arizona State, Ohio State, Oregon in a fun rematch. And then finally Notre Dame, Georgia. So in the meantime, in college football, we've got some bowl games though.
And now moving on to NCAA news, we know that Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has sued the NCAA for to block transgender athletes from competing in women's sports. What is his legal argument?
Yeah, Paxton says it violates the Texas Deceptive Trade Practices Act by promoting women's sports that could include transgender athletes instead. Now, according to the lawsuit, this law is actually intended to protect consumers from being tricked into buying products or services that aren't as advertised. So this lawsuit seeks an injunction to stop the NCAA from allowing transgender athletes to compete in women's sports in Texas or in sports that involve Texas programs, or it wants the court to require the NCAA to start marketing women's sports if transgender athletes are allowed to compete. Now, this has gained a lot of attention in recent years. 2 years ago, you had Penn swimmer Leah Thomas, formerly known as Will Thomas, winning the national championship in the women's 500-yard freestyle after ranking, I think, 65th in the men's division. This past fall, there was a lawsuit filed against the Mountain West Conference, among others, to block an alleged transgender player from competing. In fact, one of the plaintiffs in that case was actually a teammate of this alleged player. But anyway, ultimately, that lawsuit was rejected, but clearly this issue, it's not going away.
And finally, looking at NFL news, tonight's Monday Night Football matchup features New Orleans at Green Bay. How close are the Packers to clinching a spot in the playoffs?
Yeah, win tonight and they're in. Now, they are 2-touchdown favorites at home where it's freezing and snowing. They're in Wisconsin. Not really unlike here in New York. But anyway, New Orleans, though, too, they're beat up. Quarterback Derek Carr, he's out. Ditto for running back Alvin Kamara. So a playoff berth is looking pretty good for the Packers. So the actual game, might not be that close. But for those tens of millions of us who actually play fantasy football, this is actually playoffs time. I think quarterback Jordan Love's performance is going to come into play, among others, in a lot of these fantasy football playoffs that play tonight. I know in my league, I don't have anyone going tonight, but my opponent has Green Bay's defense. He only has to get a few points to beat me in our semifinals. So if the actual game, isn't a nail biter, the game within the game is going to keep the rest of us interested. So the actual game, though, starts at 8:15 Eastern tonight, and it's on ABC and ESPN.
Well, I'm sure you're going to tune in, so as a lot of others. Thank you so much, Dave, for joining us. And there's a buzz at this year's Spirit of Christmas Fair in London. Honey-infused spirits and gins that change color are said to be top trends to wow guests at British Christmas parties this festive season. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hassan brings us more.
Whiskey, tequila, vodka and rum, all made using the honey of bees from the British countryside county of Wiltshire. These festive drinks and more are set to raise a festive cheer from Christmas party guests. Beeble, the company behind the honey drinks, has over 100 hives. At the Spirit of Christmas Fair in London, their sales executive George Cummings said their bees feed on wildflower meadows.
We have 130 beehives in Wiltshire, and then we have 8 million bees that live in our beehives, and those are all part of Beeble, and we take the honey from them and infuse it into our spirits.
He has a few suggestions on how to enjoy their innovative products this festive season.
So as it gets a bit colder around Christmas with the whiskey, you can definitely make a hot toddy, and that will keep you warm. And if you're looking for a bit more of festive cheer, then honey margarita would definitely be up your alley. And I'd say maybe if the in-laws are getting a little bit on your nerves, then you can always go for what we call a dark and swarmy.
Those looking to add a theatrical touch to a party this festive season, why not add tonic to a gin that changes color? When the gin comes into contact with something acidic or alkaline, the magic happens. Lewis Jadwatt, founder of Pink Marmalade Gin, explains.
It's all to do with a magical flower called the butterfly pea flower, native to Southeast Asia and parts of Thailand. And what the pea flower does is it gives our gin pH indicating properties. So there's a little bit of science, a little bit of magic in nature.
Meanwhile, Cecilia Aldusin is hoping shoppers will add some tequila to their baskets this Christmas. She says it's becoming popular in Britain, though not yet quite to the level seen in the United States.
People are getting used to it, are getting to know it. I find the culture still that tequila is something that you use just to get drunk and fast and for young people. But in Mexico we see it as a fine whiskey you would see here.
And if you're interested in something more fruity, the Bramble Drinks Company has an array of handcrafted liqueurs infused with seasonal fruits. Certainly, there's no lack of choice for unique spirits with which to captivate friends and relatives. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Iris Tao. Good night.